Well, it's officially 9 now, if we want to get started.
Yes, exactly. So welcome everyone to this live conversation. I'm Julia from the CADAF team, and I am joined today by Amay, Kataria, a new media artist in residence at Mana Contemporary in Chicago, and Duncan, a critic, curator, and art historian, also based in Chicago. So I'll be here supporting them, but of course they are the protagonists of today's conversation, and Amay is gonna talk us through some of his works in conversation with Duncan, of course. So Amay, if you want to start, I'll pass you the baton this conversation.
Yeah. Thanks, Julia, for the introduction. Thank you to CADAF and Mana Contemporary for giving us this platform to talk about my art practice and be in conversation with Duncan, with whom I've worked for a while, almost 3 years now. And thank you to everybody who's here today to support us. It really means a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Amay, for having me. Thanks, Julia, for hosting us, and to CADAF and Mana Contemporary for putting all these programs together. Making the most out of everyone being distributed right now. So I guess our plan essentially, just to update everyone who's joining us, is to walk through the virtual booth together. So you can access that on the CADAF platform, or Julia's gonna use the screen sharing to walk us through some of the spaces as we talk through the conversation. And the plan is to start with the piece I was talking about just before 9 o'clock rolled around, momimsafe.live, which I think is, relevant to our virtual conversation right now, and to, the distributed nature of the fair. You want to start talking about that, Amay?
Yeah, you let me know if should I go ahead with the slides so you can talk over the slides?
Yeah, I think you should just turn on the screen share for the booth. Let's just drop us down to the first screen in the booth, if that's cool.
So I will start the screen share for the booth.
Duncan, I was thinking to briefly chat about the title first of the exhibition, which is called The Moment of Enigma.
Okay, sure.
Is it okay? Is it okay if I say a few things about it, because I think that'll set the context of this entire exhibition and what's happening in our conversation?
Yeah, of course.
So the title Moment of Enigma basically sort of arrived from the whole idea of self-analysis. And these works that I'm presenting in this exhibition were all made in the past 3 to 4 months, especially starting from March, when the world started slowing down. And a lot of people said that, oh, it's time to put some focus on yourself. It's time to do some reflection on what you do. And it was a good time for me to reflect on my art practice also, because some of the works that Duncan and I did in the past was a show at Ars Electronica, where a lot of my work was about this coexistence of humans with machines. But in this context of this COVID lockdown, I suddenly realized that there was just a sort of tilt that I had to take in my art practice to talk about some things that I was feeling because of this. So here I want to just briefly introduce this quote from this very famous Indian sculpture artist, Alan Talur, who says that it is important to travel towards clarity, but when you travel towards clarity, you start touching the mystery. And the word mystery is what brings up the word enigma, because when I started sitting down and thinking about my art practice and getting clarity on what I'm feeling and how I'm thinking about the situation, I felt this sense of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty, and this mystery around me as well. So I think of Moment of Enigma as some sort of a hypothesis or a proposition that responds with a moment of clarity. It responds with these anchors of kindness. It responds with these anchors of love and strength that basically like led me through these past 4 months. So that's how the title sort of came into being when I made the works, and I was thinking, how do I sort of sum up everything? Yeah.
Right, and I guess the title sort of speaks to this idea, that this is momentary in a sense, and I wonder how much you were thinking about that when you conceptualized the Mom I'm Safe project. When we all sort of went into lockdown in March, we didn't know how long this would last, and that's still very much the case. So I wonder how that moment, I guess, has shifted or elongated since you started the project.
It has definitely elongated. When I was making the work, it was to solve a problem, which was a very simple problem. Because in March, I was talking to my mom, and she said that we need to basically face chat once every day because she's concerned about me and she wants to check on me. And I started thinking how I can solve that problem. I mean, I don't mind chatting with my mom once every day, especially FaceTiming her. But it did feel like a friction that, okay, there was this formality that we had to go through to call each other and start this conversation. So I wanted to reduce that friction and create some sort of a platform which can let them check on me at any moment of time, especially when I'm sitting in my home studio, because what you can see on the screen is actually my home studio, my home space where these things are going live right now. And there's a webcam that's attached right in front of me, which shows this coordinate space that I spent a lot of time making and doing things, especially from March to May. Yeah, so that time period has elongated. I really thought that this would be for a month and a half or maybe 2 months, but I released the project on March 20th, no, April 15th. Yes, March 20th, Chicago went under lockdown. On April 15th, I put the project and sent it to my parents, my close friends and family. And then on May 12th or May 10th, that was Mother's Day, I made it public. And then since then, it's just been getting traction and it's just been going on. And it seems like my parents also really like it and they don't want me to close it. So the time period has definitely elongated much more than how I anticipated.
And you mentioned this when you were discussing the title, but the message behind the piece is, really positive, one of love. And I wonder sort of how that contrasts to a lot of new media work about surveillance, how this piece, in a way, you're being surveilled at your own, voluntarily, I guess, but I wonder if that ever creates a tension or if you're ever hyper aware of your actions in the studio.
Initially, I was very hyper aware. I felt very vulnerable actually when I was making this piece. When you're sort of conceiving a piece or if you're trying to make something, there is this big hurdle that you have to go through. That hurdle for me here was this vulnerability that I was exposing myself to by just live streaming my activity on the internet. But I tried to convince myself that no, it's for a better purpose. It's for something that I feel very strongly and honestly about, and it's something that I care about a lot. And that feeling helped me get over that hurdle or that fear of being publicly exposed. So from that perspective, yes, initially it was very challenging for me to do this, but slowly it became better. And my hyper awareness also reduced. Like firstly I was really conscious about what I was doing in the studio and how people were seeing me, and I got some of the messages which were slightly discouraging also. People said, oh, are you not worried about somebody like hacking into your system and showing some other video content? And that there was a lot of concern that also came on the printer, but that was definitely accompanied by the love and kindness that I got from my friends and family, who said things like, oh, wish all the moms have this for their kids who are outside and they're not living with their parents. So I think there was positivity and there was also some negativity, but the positivity definitely triumphed and helped me sort of continue the project further and helped me make more satellite works around it, which are based on some of the material that I collected, especially the receipts. So yeah, I didn't even talk about the receipts. So one of the features in the work is that on the website. So Julia can start interacting with the website. So once you click on it, there's an option to do a send. So if you click on send, you can actually send a message from the website, and the message gets printed in real time into a receipt printer, which is in my studio, and gives a tactile message that I can actually read. So I think Julia's sending a message which will get printed. Okay, yeah. So a message just got printed here. So this is how, like, this became an alternate sort of conversation system. You know, like it was very twisted in my take. And so my nephews in Switzerland, they would message me, and I would respond by showing them some messages on a paper to the camera. You know. So this conversation became almost like or this communication style almost became like a performance to me, and it's evolving over time. And I'm trying to still understand where this is really going.
And that sort of makeshift mode of communication is interesting. That's one of the things I wanted to ask about, sort of how the sensation of receiving one of these printed messages coming out of the receipt printer versus the experience that we feel sort of nonstop of emails and text messages and that sort of thing coming in. I'm sure it's a much different response.
Yeah, I mean, the sound of the printer is loud, I will say, especially for this kind of cubicle, this very small space.
And there's no mute, right? There's no
mute.
mode.
Yeah, I really wish there was a mute. If I mute the printer, that means I'm muting the entire project. I could still keep the camera up and turn off the messaging, but I feel like that's a very important part of the project that I would not want to turn off. And initially it was actually very exciting to get a message and sort of move from my desk and come up to the messages. And sometimes I found myself waving. I find myself waving to the camera a lot of times, and somebody would say, "I'm watching you, I'm doing this." At CADAF, actually, I got a bunch of messages from people saying that, "Oh, this is really cool. Can you see what I'm typing? Or can you see these messages?" They started sending me these cryptic patterns day before yesterday. It was very surprising that people really took well to it. But yeah, I think the printer sound became distracting. Finally, I think 2 months into the project, and now that's why I made the virtual printer, because sometimes I don't want to get up from my desk and go to the printer and see the message. I just want to open a screen and see all the messages. So Julia can take us to the next screen, which is basically the next work in the CADAF booth called the virtual printer.
Yeah, I have a. Oh, you're muted. Hang on. Yes, I don't know why. Whilst you maybe answer this question, I'm going to unmute Duncan. I don't know why he muted. From the audience is saying, Amay, is part of the project to look immediately at the receipts, or do you sometimes kind of look at them later? So maybe you collate them and then you look at them later. So
I think it's definitely both. For example, in the beginning, I was going and seeing the receipts immediately. Slowly, that kind of shifted around. And especially if I'm in my studio working on something really hard, or if I have my headphones on and I can't hear the printer buzzing, I do occasionally come back to this fish pond that I have where everything is set up to look at these messages. And sometimes I'm working late at night and I go to sleep and I wake up in the morning and come check out the printer and see some messages sitting here. So I think it's been both. But to really solve the problem of going from my desk to the printer immediately to give response to somebody who might be watching me, I made the virtual printer, so I don't have to even get up from my desk, and I can just look at this printer, which has all the messages that are ever sent on this project to see. So lots of love, Amay. Somebody sent me a message right now. Thank you. Oops. Can we go back to the screen? Julia, is that okay? Yeah. So you don't have to refresh it. So if anybody sends a message, it's going to live print these messages. How they get printed in my home studio, they'll get printed in this printer as well.
And one of the interesting things I think that that relates to this and some of your other recent work is sort of the way that it translates, this sort of digital communication or digital information into a physical form, which also gives it a sense of scale. So the number of messages that you receive inevitably builds up as this roll of paper. And I wonder if you can give us a sense of what you have done with that so far, whether you've collected it and what you plan on doing with it long term.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. One of the things I want to say about it is that in this work, once you start interacting with it, so Julia, if you click on print, you can actually see this long receipt printing. So you can see all these messages that were sort of sent. So
Yeah,
this talk is
that's
great.
mine. This is mine also. Smile.
Exactly.
It's really great. Yeah.
So there's this long sort of thread of messages that you can see, which is very similar to the thread of messages that I get in the studio, which is all this information that you can scroll through. What I started doing with these, I started making these rolls of receipts, and because they were just accumulating on me so much. And I had in school, I took a lot of classes in the biolab, and I had like a lot of these beakers at home. So I mean, I believe like artists just work a lot with the material that's around them, and I started joining them too. And the first prototype I made for this work called Antidote, with Julia can actually probably move to eventually, was inspired by this kind of little prototype, which was putting these rolls of receipts into these glass vials. And I wanted to create I wanted to accumulate and I wanted to store these receipts because I feel this almost feels like an archive for the future. It's like a collection of kindness. It's a collection of gratitude that helped me like get through this, and is currently helping me out to get through this. So it's something that I wanted to preserve for the future. So Julia, can you move to the next work, the COVID antidote work? I think you might have to click on the expand on the top right.
Oh, should I do that?
Yeah, I think that's easier to navigate. So on the bottom left, yeah, this one, exactly. Yeah, let's keep this in the expanded view. It's just easier to move around.
Yeah.
I also see a lot of scribbling on the screen. I don't know if that's you.
That's not me.
Oh, somebody else is doing this. Okay. So yeah, I mean, this work, COVID-19 Antidote, basically emerged from combining these receipts into these beakers that I had, and eventually taking this form and leading to this kind of work.
Yeah, and when we discussed this, project as you started thinking about it, and in advance of CADAF and as it grows, we were sort of using this abstract language of the book to talk about how you organize information, how you physically organize information and conceptually organize information. So do you see this as in some form an artist book, or do you see it differently?
I think I definitely see it as an artist book, because all these vials in every collection or every edition of this work, there are 12 vials that are filled with these rolls of receipts from since the beginning. So I divide them all in these 12 vials, and I look at those vials as chapters in a book, or as portions of, or as a dosage of an antidote. So together they make this big dose of antidote that I need. So it's very much, I think the language to describe this work can definitely be borrowed from this long tradition of artist work, where artists have been experimenting with material and packaging it together in experimental forms. So I kind of think of it as an experimental artist book, where each of these vials become the chapters in the book, and the messages become the content of the book, and together they represent this coherent thing that one can hold on to.
And so you mentioned them as dosages. Does that mean that you're not meant to sort of binge these, to read them all in one sitting?
I have read them all when I was making this, and it's definitely fun. The messages come from like a variety. I made some list of messages that I really like. For example, the one that you can see in the screen is focus only on what you can um, control and let go of others which you cannot. Good evening, dear. Keep on believing, my dear, that good things are happening and they will happen. Happy morning and have a good day. Today is a new day, new beginning. So get down on your knees to pray and get on your feet to work. Have a happy morning and have a good day. So these messages are like these tokens of strength for me, you know, like just going through this past couple of months, making the work that I was making, shifting my focus, shifting the focus of my art practice. So I feel these are messages that are sent from my parents, and they are very motivational, and they were literally just helping me through, like virtually, to go through this moment, to become these anchors of strength and resilience, to face this moment, to focus on my work and deliver things that I want to deliver, to do things that I want to do.
Yeah,
that's great. So I know.
Can I ask you? Sorry, no, I wanted to ask. If I wanted to purchase this work, how would you decide? Is it a random? Do I get a random message, or do I get? Who decides what message do I get? Do you decide, or I'm just curious.
So that's a great question. Artists are very bad about promoting their work sometimes, and I should promote it by saying that these are for sale. Every edition, so there are 3 editions. Every edition consists of 12 vials, which has all these messages in there. Before I explain what the content of those messages is, I want to say that these 12 vials will be basically in a box that you will receive. So that's the work that you get. And since there are 3 editions, the first edition of the work has all the messages segmented into timelines, like I was saying, chapters in a book. So up until this past week, I took a backup of all the messages and I segmented them into 12 sections, starting from the beginning, which are all arranged in this box, or this box of antidote. So as a collector, that's what you get. You get a wooden box with these 12 vials in it. You can open it, you can take out the receipts, you can unpack the receipts and see all these messages. And it's not that they're all divided very equally. Some of them might have 20 messages, the other one might have 25 messages, the other one might have 30 messages. So there are about 400 messages that are actually divided in this first edition into these vials.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And Amay, I know that that you were thinking of talking about the center of varying gravity, but I wonder if maybe, you know, personally connecting the sort of physical digital relationship of the Mom I'm Safe project and the Antidote project to the Holland and excuse me, the Hollands and Holarchy series. And then we could talk about the your collaborative projects, Center of Varying Gravity and the Janus study in conclusion.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. I think that works. Yeah.
So should I move to this?
Yeah, that's great. That would be great.
That would be great.
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier with the prints that I find really interesting is sort of how physical they become, and I think that's something that we can see here also. But you know, before we start discussing, you know, the physicality and the transition between physical and digital, I wonder if you want to give us some background on the title of the series.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll say, but before I get into this, I do want to say that there are these 3 artists that I really like and are very strongly present in my practice as inspiration, or from whom I beg, borrow, and steal ideas. You know, the first is John Girard, who's an Irish artist based in Vienna. I had the privilege of having a studio visit with him last year in Vienna after Ars Electronica that Duncan and I participated in. Then is the New Delhi-based art collective called Rux Media Collective, with also whom I had a pleasure to discuss my art practice in detail last year in Philippines. And lastly is the French artist Pierre Huyghe, who has been very strongly present as an influencer in my work. And I was reading a review of his exhibition called Umwelt that he did at Serpentine Galleries last year. And in that write-up, basically that write-up was the one that led me to this concept of a Holland. That's why I feel this was important. So Julia, if you can move to the slide share.
Oh, yes.
The slide, sorry, the slideshow.
I have to stop sharing this one then. So bear with me for a moment. And I'm going to start slides.
So while you bring that up, it's basically, the write-up introduced me to this idea of a Holland, because it directed me towards the work of this writer called Arthur Koestler. So if you move to the next slide, it's the book called Ghost in the Machine that he wrote in 1967, sorry. There he introduced this idea of what a Holland is. So I was researching this in February or March, and I ended up writing a research paper to summarize my research at Mana Contemporary. So if you go to the next slide, that shows the title of the paper that you guys can look up on the internet and find, or Julia, there's also a link in the slide share that you can share later maybe. So Arthur Koestler describes a Holland as basically something which is inspired from these two words called holos. These are two Greek words. Holos, that comes from the meaning of the whole, and the other part is the on, which comes from a particle called an electron or a proton. So he combined them both together to really like flatten this duality of what a whole is and what a part is into this one idea of a autonomous unit, or like an abstract concept called a Holland. And a hierarchy of Hollands defines a hierarchy of a complex system. And because of my background in computing and my background as a software engineer, I was looking at this figure that is from the book since the very beginning of my classes in undergrad. So this is a tree in computer science, which is described in 1967 as a hierarchy of Hollands, where every single square in the tree is actually oh no, don't scribble on the screen, whoever it is.
I don't know. I wrote in the chat, whoever is scribbling, not anymore. So I'm not really sure who is doing that.
Yeah, cool. So so every single unit of the square is actually a Holland, and this tree is a hierarchy of Hollands, which is called a holarchy. So this concept basically became the motivator, or the thing that feeds into the prints that I generated, which are basically a precise algorithmic representation of a tree, where if you go to the next, where every single square here is like a Holland, and the combination of these squares is actually a holarchy of these Hollands. So that's what became the motivation for these prints.
So they're sort of a representation that simultaneously represents the part and the whole, in a sense.
Correct. And that relationship between each Holland, for example, every Holland has these two primary characteristics, where it has this ability to be a whole, which is the self-assertiveness, without which it cannot really function independently. It is this autonomous unit, and then it also has this ability to be a part, which means that it's an important part in the bigger picture. For example, if you remove one of the squares from the print, then the print doesn't remain what it is. Like the structure doesn't remain what it is. The holarchy breaks, the hierarchy breaks. So these prints were it was me trying to understand this concept of holarchy, and by using computation and algorithms to make these things.
And you have the print series, but there's also a digital component. So can you talk about the relationship between the two?
Yeah, for sure. So before that, Julia, so these are some of the holarchies, representations of holarchies from the book. These are some prints that are available for purchase on the CADAF booth. So definitely check it out and give your feedback. This is another series of the prints. So I created basically two versions of the holarchies. This is the line version that I like to think about it. It's called homotypical, and the other one is a page version, which is this extended long series where I name the print 10 towards infinity. So for the digital version, I think it'll be good, Julia, to switch to the CADAF booth now, if that's okay.
Yes.
So the digital version that can also be seen on the CADAF booth that Julia will be pulling up briefly is called interactive holarchies. So yeah, if you expand that and go to the first, the screen, exactly, it is perfect. And you can start scrolling up and down. So this is the interactive holarchy is very much a response to the CADAF exhibition. I think it's the top right one, just above the printer. Top right. Yeah, this is it. This work.
I thought I was on it before. Hang on. Oh yeah.
Yeah, so if you just scroll up and down. Go fast.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes.
It's really long.
It's amazing. I didn't scroll that fast. I mean, scrolling fast is great. Wow.
Yeah. You really this is like an up close version of your of the 10 towards infinity version of the holarchy. And I think that the exhibition was the perfect site to show this work, because the entire exhibition is very web friendly, and I wanted to create this sort of relationship between the actual physical print. Of course, you can't really see it in person, and you only see it through a photograph, but you can take that scale that you're looking at of that print in a physical space and compare it with the digital space and how it looks like in this kind of interactive environment.
And I think this is something that I had touched on a little bit in terms of how the physical scale sort of gives a sense of tactility, or something to compare our digital interactions to. So this idea that whether it's on a screen with a mouse, or particularly on a touch screen, the print itself is sort of the width of a screen, and so imagining the gesture of the scroll that we sort of do endlessly, especially at least personally, this increased phone time in quarantine, but it's not something that we think about, how much information we consume, or how much virtual ground we cover in a day. And I think that this series, both the interactive Hollands and the prints, really give a sense of scale to that interaction that we do every day.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because it aligns really well and overlaps very well with the whole idea of Holland, which is so abstract and it's so out in the wild, but it's a very powerful device. I like to think about it as a device of knowledge, as a system that you can apply to environments, to complex systems, to understand and break them apart. And if you use this idea of a Holland and apply it on the amount of information that we are getting, it really spans all the way from the macroscopic to the microscopic, which the print and the series tries to capture. It tries to flatten this expanse into something that we can witness or experience in person through these prints.
And both were created using the same custom algorithm. That's right.
Correct. So Julia, if you click on the expand again, let's look at the other version.
Yep. Yes.
So on the top left, the first one.
Okay, and then I go to the other one.
So this is the homotypical that you can see in the interactive holarchy version, which is exactly very similar to how it's installed in the physical space, which is the screen next to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You can see that in the details
Yes.
panel as well.
I'll make it bigger like this. Yes.
This is great. Yeah. So this is great. So you can
Yeah.
see that this is how it's installed, and there's an interactive version for it. So I feel like the CADAF exhibition, when I was planning my booth at CADAF, and Duncan and I were having this conversation, I feel like the works, the idea worked really well with the interface and the tools that we had to set up the booth, because we could really show this this duality between the physical and the digital in this very interesting and interactive way.
And just to provide a sense of scale, those prints behind you, are those what we're looking at, mock-ups of what we're looking at here on the screen as well?
Yeah. So I mean, the way I was sitting in my studio, I didn't have access to like a big printer or anything. So what I did was I created these prints and I subdivided them into these A4 size sheets, and then printed them and then taped them together. And I remember doing this for the long print, and it just so long. It took me hours to like paste them together and see them. But I had to really see them in actual scale before I could really tell the printer and like invest in actually getting it fully printed, which is the final version that you see in the exhibition. So yeah, I mean, these are some of the test runs. This one, especially the same scale as what we see in the space. This one is slightly smaller, and I realized that it needs to go bigger. So I increased the scale and I made it equal to this. So I created basically a bunch of these test runs to finalize my prints. And that's why I think you mentioned a really good point, the size of these prints being equal to the size of the screen. It's equal to the size of this A4 size paper. Like I really liked, one is basically the size of this dimension, the other is the size of this dimension. So it's all borrowed from the media that we use every day. It's all borrowed by things that we interact with every day. So it shouldn't feel very unfamiliar.
Right, but sort of uncanny at the same time, because it's you know, these proportions are not the ones we're used to. So I wonder, maybe it makes sense to move back to the slideshow, and we can, you know, I noticed in the references to Ghost in the Machine that in addition to the Hollands and Holarchy concepts, there was also a reference to the Greek god Janus, the two-faced god who looks forward and backward into the future and the past.
Yeah. So Julia, if you can go one slide back, perfect. Yeah. So this is also another book by Arthur Kessler, who takes this idea of a Holland and expands on it in the other book called Janus, summing up. And I think the reason why he does that is because he's a very prolific writer, and these books are extremely long, like 700 pages, 500 pages long. And he uses the idea of a Holland and describes Janus. He introduces Janus as a metaphor for the Holland, because he thinks that just understanding Holland as an abstract concept is just not enough, because you can't really touch it, you can't really feel it. It's so abstract. It's something you have to really like have it in your mind and apply it on systems. So for example, Holland has a very strong history in the history of computing, a lot of complex softwares. The architecture of the complex softwares that we use every day are holarchic, because they are these little Hollands that are working and in autonomy as well as in collaboration to determine the stability of these complex systems. So he uses Janus as another step to explain what a Holland is. And Janus is this Roman god who is a two-faced god. So Julia, if you move to the next slide.
Yeah.
Is a two-faced god where one face.
There you go.
Where one. Oh, I don't see the next slide. You can probably escape it. Yeah, there you go. I see it now.
Oh, yeah.
So where
it's low. I noticed that I click and then it kind of takes a while to get there. So
yeah. So in the Janus, there's this one phase that's pointing in the past, and the other phase is pointing in the future. And he uses that as a metaphor for Holland, because he says this duality that Janus represents, this polarity of the two faces, is the same polarity that he's been basically trying to flatten with the Holland. It's the same polarity that the Holland represents, of the whole as well as the part. So he says that let's take the Janus god, the Janus figure, and flip the heads. and let's say the heads are actually looking inside into each other, where one head is the whole, which is looking inside itself, and the other head is the part that's looking up at the whole. And that's what led him to describe, use the Janus figure as a metaphor for the Holland, and became the inspiration for some of the next work, a collaborative work. But I will say, like, when I was looking at Janus, I also found these figures in the Hindu culture of the Lord Ganesha, who was also represented by having multiple heads sometimes. One thing that I want to say about Janus too is that Janus is considered a guardian of transitions and time, and is a guardian of doorways, because one head is in the past, the other head is one head is in the past, and the other head is in the future. Together, it represents a monad, the single sculpture, which is the representation of the current moment, of the right now. So that whole idea aligned very well with this moment of enigma thought that I had, that I'd been thinking about how to achieve this moment of clarity, and led me to do these explorations on Janus with a collaborator and a friend of mine, Philip Mullican from Chicago.
And Julia, will you take us to the next slide?
Hang on, let me
So I think once you go full screen, it takes like a little bit of lag.
Yeah, I think so. It takes a little time. Is this correct? I've clicked once. I don't for the
This is great.
And maybe
this is great.
line.
But maybe we could just go forward to the renderings.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is better.
Yeah, so maybe you want to talk formally about the piece, and then we can talk briefly about the final piece in the booth, and hopefully have a couple of minutes left for questions at least.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
And if anyone does have questions, you're welcome to type them,
Put them in the chat.
In the chat, and we can try to address those as well.
So yeah, Julia, I'll give you a heads up when we should move to the video, because in the CADAF booth, it's actually a video. These are just some screenshots. Maybe Duncan, we should move to the video, because I think it'll be just better to talk on top of the video rather than just looking at a screenshot. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll move to the booth again.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
This is so much back and forth.
That's okay. I don't mind.
Okay. Okay. Great. So yeah, so the brief background that I gave you all about Arthur Koestler, Hollands and holarchy, Janus being a metaphor of a Holland, and Janus being this guardian of transitions and time and doorways, a presider over wars and beginning of wars and ending of wars, or a presider over war and peace, led all of this to make me very fascinated with an idea to understand and look for these alternate representations of Janus, especially in the context of a Holland, where Arthur Koestler mentions about flipping the Janus heads into each other. So once I started doing the drawings and I started figuring out that, okay, if I flip the heads of the Janus, it looks very uninteresting, because we lose this insight that the original Janus figure gives us of the present moment, this enigma of the present moment. And the idea that struck me was to basically bring them far apart. What if we actually expand this and then use the space between the present and the future to emphasize and to accentuate the present moment, which led me to work with Philip, whose practice is based upon basically CGI graphics, and he's an expert at 3D rendering tools, to work together and come up with this kind of representation, which is a virtual sculpture of this Janus figure, where these two heads are twisted. Like if you see closely as the video moves, the twist begins at the figure. It's this one sort of monad. Monad basically is a term that sculptures use to define this one sort of figure, like this unique entity, and stretch it apart into a dyad, which is these two figures. But of course, connected by this single thing. I still think this is a monad, but yeah, people could argue that this is a dyad now, But yeah, so to really like connect them together in the center with this a mysterious sort of mesh, or this mysterious sort of connection that these two figures represent as this moment of enigma of the present moment.
Right, and I can't help but read the formally this twist as that we're seeing now in the video, in relation to fiber optic cables, that sort of thing. So it really sort of speaks to the idea of both the present moment being or feeling extended, but also it being virtual or connected digitally in this way. I'm not sure if that was intentional, but it's impossible for me not to read it that way in light of the current moment.
Do you mean, when you say connected, do you mean in terms of communication? Because I do connect with the idea of the present moment elongated that we actually started with when we talked about Mom, I'm Safe project.
Right. Well, that's exactly what I'm thinking about, and yeah. How in a sense the present could be represented by this fiber optic cable. I'm the name of the sculptor escapes me, but I saw a great show in Berlin last year, and it was just a 150-pound piece of fiber optic cable sitting on the ground. It was enough to sort of shift. That being out of context was enough for you to consider the many insights that the cable in context sort of provides. And I think that's something interesting here. Elongating that sort of allows you to reflect on connectivity as much as it does, outwardly as much as it does this sort of inward reflection that the inward facing Janus represents.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great insight. Yeah, and I think like this work, we just finished it this week, so I'm still working on the language to describe this work. So I think these presentations and these conversations are extremely helpful to devise a language of how to sort of contextualize this work. So I think these are great insights, Duncan.
And is this an ongoing collaboration with Phil?
So this is our first collaboration, and we both are very excited about the results because I think when collaborating with an artist, it's interesting. Some of the collaborations just emerge so organically, and I feel like here the work ethic that we both brought to the table worked really well because we had a goal that we had to put this work together for CADAF, and he was very aggressive in planning the things. I was catching up with him all the time with all the other things that I was doing. So he really brought the project home, I would say. We have alternate renderings also in progress. So this is a render that took about 3.5 days to come together. And this is also not done in the best quality that we would like. But for the first edition, I think this is great. The other render would have taken about 2 months for 7.5 minutes. This is, we also feel, I really like the aesthetics of Girard, which is extremely slow and excruciatingly slow. But here, in the context of CADAF and this exhibition, we like the space of the work that it has. And maybe like in the future, we expand on it by bringing it to like another medium, like augmented reality, where you can have more like a tabletop experience and move around the piece to really get a better idea, or to look at it from a distance to see both the heads together. That's something that is on the table for both Phil and I to explore in the future. And
there's one more.
Yeah, Duncan, I wish I didn't have to interrupt you, but we have about maybe 5-6 minutes left of our slide. So I don't know, I mean, I would also have some questions, but maybe about this, because this is an amazing work, but I might ask you offline. I don't know if you wanted to show another work actually before the end.
I mean, if you have questions, we can address them. Otherwise, we can jump on the other work. We have content to talk about.
I just thought it was very interesting that actually the Janus image is 2 faces, but you can see the faces and they're sort of attached by the back, whereas you decided here to, get rid of the identity in a way. So I was wondering whether it was, whether there was a reason sort of for it, or or it's just
Yeah, I mean, there was something about I don't know. There's something about you know, turning the system around. There's something about rebel. I don't know. There is something about flipping the system around. We are so accustomed to these myths and beliefs, and we take them as it is. But as an artist, to be thinking critically in today's time, I believe like Arthur Kessler really motivated me to take that decision where he says, we should try flipping the head of the Janus and see how it sort of works together with the Holland. I think when we were making a decision about which representation works well together, I had both the drawings. I mean, these were just very, very childlike drawings, but there was a drawing of the heads like far apart, facing the faces,
Yeah.
tilted away from each other, but also separated, and also faces pointing into each other. And we decided to go with the pointing
Yeah.
inside because it just felt a lot more evocative. It just felt a lot more
That's true.
different as compared to things that we might be used to seeing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a very emotional piece, I think. Yes.
It can go slower, I feel. It can go much slower than this. Right now it's going really fast, I feel.
And the last piece in the booth is a generative animation that you made for a collaborative project. I know that we're really tight on time, so maybe
yeah,
you could tell me a
I'll
few
quickly
words
go over
about
this. Yeah. So I want to give credit firstly to Brianna Santina, who basically was the writer, and Martin Gallery in Chicago, where I'm opening a show this evening, where I'm showing this generator work as well. The curatorial premise of the work was really good because they paired up anonymously a writer and a visual artist. And I received this writing prompt from Brianna, whom I came to know her name just yesterday or like a couple of days back. And then I had to respond visually. And the gist of the write-up was basically that the writer was talking about the sense of transformation, especially taking the current context of the lockdown as a point of departure to talk about the sense of transition, the sense of transformation, and finding new symbol of strength. For the writer, the fuchsia flower became a symbol of strength. So I have a lot of fuchsia flower pictures in my studio where I was taking inspiration from, and also trying to capture, there were about 18 colors that the writer mentioned in the write-up, and I made like a chart of those colors, added probabilities to it as to what they feel the most connected to, and created this kind of a simulation that's inspired from like fractal patterns to create a generative piece as a sort of meditation on basically finding resilience and finding calmness in the chaos of the moment. So that's what the work is really about.
That's wonderful. Well, we're getting pretty close in time.
We can certainly open up if there are no live questions at the moment in this talk, but we can certainly now open up for questions, but also remind everyone that if they have more questions as they go through your booth, that there's always the chat on CADAF Online, but it could also just inquire on specific works if they want to know more about them, of course. It's not like this is the only chance to ask you about your work, of course. But
yeah, and please check out the CADAF booth, because I'll be the CADAF booth and I can answer questions there as well. If you know me personally,
exactly.
Please reach out to me personally too.
Yes, or send you a message on the virtual printer as well.
Yeah. Oh yes, that's true.
But it has been fantastic, I have to say. The 1 hour flew by. I suddenly looked at the clock and I said, oh wow, this is yes, this is
yeah.
So this has been a great insight into your work and your art, and thank you for giving also the background on the works that you're showing at CADAF. I mean, I wish we could do that for all of the artists, because it's always the best to hear from the artist himself or herself. So
yeah, I'm really thankful because to CADAF and Mana Contemporary, where I'm doing my residency right now, because the format of the exhibition propelled me to design it like this. I think that was really the biggest motivation.
Yes.
So yeah, thanks a lot to CADAF and Mana Contemporary for inviting me for this.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop the talk now because we're going into another panel. We have
Sounds good. Yeah.
a whole day of panels. There are no questions, but as I said, I just wanted to remind everyone that Amay is not going far. So if you have think of something afterwards, you can always reach out to him. Thank you for participating.
Yeah, thanks for joining us,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.